Imagine opening an old dusty drawer and finding a single coin that quietly carries a fortune. The Buffalo nickel is not just spare change, it is a time capsule of American history. First comes the legendary 1913 Liberty Head, Buffalo nickel, a coin that should never have existed yet now sells for millions. Then the mysterious 1918 8/7 Buffalo nickel, where a tiny date mistake turned into a collector's dream. Next is the powerful 1926 Buffalo nickel, struck during hard times with so few surviving today that even worn examples shock the market. Then enters the 1937 three-legged Buffalo nickel, a dramatic mint error where the buffalo lost a leg and gained immortality. And finally, the rare 1916 double-die Buffalo nickel, where double details whisper secrets of early minting chaos. These 5 coins were once ignored, pocket change passed from hand to hand without a second glance. Today, they represent lost fortunes, missed chances, and hidden wealth. Collectors spend lifetimes chasing them. Dealers guard them like treasure. Each scratch tells a story. Each strike marks history. Somewhere right now, one of these nickels could still be hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment someone finally looks closely, because sometimes the smallest coin carries the biggest surprise. The story of the 1913 Buffalo nickel begins in the early 20th century, when the United States was searching for a new artistic identity in its coinage after decades of conservative designs, and President Theodore Roosevelt strongly believed that American coins should reflect beauty, strength, and national pride, which led to a complete transformation of U.S. coin art and opened the door for sculptors to play a major role in coin design, and among them was James Earl Fraser, a talented artist who had grown up in the American West and had first-hand experience with Native American culture, frontier life, and the powerful presence of the American bison. And Fraser wanted to create a coin that felt truly American, not inspired by Europe, but born from the soil spirit and history of the United States. And by 1911, the idea of redesigning the Liberty Head nickel was approved, and Fraser began working on what would become one of the most iconic coins in American history, and his vision was to honor Native Americans and the untamed wilderness that once covered the nation, and he chose to place a powerful Native American portrait on the obverse, which was not a single individual, but a composite of several real Native American chiefs, including Irontail, Two Moons, and Big Tree, all men who represented dignity, strength, and survival in a rapidly changing America. And on the reverse, Fraser placed the American bison, often mistakenly called a buffalo, which symbolized the vast plains. The frontier spirit and the dramatic loss of wildlife caused by westward expansion and industrial growth. And when the Buffalo nickel was officially released in 1913, it immediately stood out unlike any coin Americans had ever seen before, with its bold, high-relief design, rough textures, and realistic imagery. It felt more like a small sculpture than everyday money. And the public reaction was intense, with many people fascinated by its beauty, while others complained that the design wore down too quickly, in circulation, and was difficult for vending machines to handle. And the first version, released in early 1913, featured the buffalo standing on a raised mound with the denomination 5 cents engraved on the mound. And this design is now known as the Type 1 Buffalo nickel. And while it was visually stunning, it quickly proved impractical because the raised denomination wore away very fast, leaving the coin without a visible value, and this caused concern for banks, merchants, and the Treasury Department. And as a result, later in 1913, the design was modified to lower the ground beneath the buffalo and recess the denomination into a protected area, creating what collectors now call the Type 2 Buffalo nickel. And this change happened within the same year, making 1913 unique as the only year with 2 distinct major design types, and both types were minted at 3 different mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, although the Type 1 was produced only briefly before the redesign, and this makes certain 1913 Buffalo nickels especially valuable and historically important, and during their time in circulation, these coins witnessed enormous changes in American society, from the closing of the frontier to World War I, the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and beyond, and millions of Americans carried Buffalo nickels in their pockets during times of hardship, prosperity, migration, and war, and the coin became a silent witness to everyday life in early 20th century America and, despite their popularity, the Buffalo nickels were notorious for wearing down quickly due to their high relief design, which caused many coins to lose their dates, entirely creating what collectors call dateless Buffalo nickels. And even today, millions of these worn coins still exist. And special restoration techniques are sometimes used to reveal their dates, though altered coins lose collector value, and over time the Buffalo nickel became deeply embedded in American culture, appearing in movies, advertisements, and popular imagery symbolizing toughness, resilience, and nostalgia for a vanished era. And by 1938, the Buffalo nickel was officially replaced by the Jefferson nickel, marking the end of a 25-year run. Yet its legacy never faded, and collectors began to recognize its artistic importance, rarity, and historical value. And today, the 1913 Buffalo nickel stands at the beginning of this legendary series, representing the birth of one of the most beloved U.S. coins ever made, and for collectors. The 1913 issues, especially high-grade examples of the Type 1 and Type 2, are prized treasures with values ranging from modest amounts for worn coins to very high prices for well-preserved specimens and beyond money. The 1913 Buffalo nickel tells a powerful story about American identity, artistic ambition, cultural memory, and the cost of progress, and it remains a symbol of a nation looking at its past while stepping boldly into the future. As the 1913 Buffalo nickel continued to circulate across the United States, it became more than just currency. It became a reflection of a nation struggling between preservation and progress. Because at the very moment this coin was released, the American buffalo itself was nearly extinct, once numbering in the tens of millions roaming freely across the Great Plains. The bison population had been reduced to just a few hundred animals by the early 1900s, due to overhunting railroad expansion and deliberate policies that targeted Native American survival, and James Earl Fraser was deeply aware of this tragic reality, which is why the buffalo on the coin stands heavy, powerful, and solemn, almost like a memorial frozen in metal, and many historians believe Fraser modeled the buffalo after Black Diamond, a famous bison housed at the Bronx Zoo, making the coin not just symbolic, but tied to a real living animal known to Americans of that era, and at the same time, the Native American. Portrait on the obverse served as a reminder of cultures being pushed aside by modernization and industrial growth, and unlike earlier coins that used idealized classical faces, Fraser insisted on realism, showing strong cheekbones, weathered features, and a proud expression that commanded respect rather than pity. And this artistic honesty made the coin revolutionary, but also controversial, because some critics felt it broke too sharply from traditional European-influenced designs, and others worried it portrayed Native Americans in a way that felt too raw for polite society. Yet the public quickly developed an emotional connection to the design, and the coin gained popularity despite its practical flaws. And throughout the 1910s and 1920s, Buffalo nickels passed through the hands of farmers, factory workers, soldiers, shopkeepers, and children, becoming part of everyday life during some of the most dramatic decades in American history. And during World War I, these nickels traveled overseas in the pockets of American troops, serving as small reminders of home, and later during the Great Depression, the Buffalo nickel became a symbol of hardship as families counted every cent, and worn nickels with nearly vanished dates still bought bread milk or a newspaper, and the fact that so many dates disappeared from circulation only added to the mystique of the coin. And later generations would find jars filled with dateless Buffalo nickels, sparking curiosity and a desire to learn their hidden history. And collectors eventually began to study the 1913 issues, closely identifying subtle differences in strike-quality mint marks and die characteristics, and the existence of both Type 1 and Type 2 designs, in the same year made 1913 a cornerstone for the entire Buffalo nickel series, and serious collectors often begin their journey with this year, because it tells the story of artistic ambition colliding with real-world usage, and the quick redesign shows how even iconic art must sometimes bend to practicality. And as time passed, numismatists also uncovered fascinating mint stories, including how different mints produced coins with slightly different appearances due to variations in die pressure, metal flow, and quality control. And these differences give each surviving 1913 Buffalo nickel a unique personality, almost like fingerprints of the past. And by the time the series ended in 1938, the Buffalo nickel had already achieved legendary status, and when it was replaced by the Jefferson nickel, many Americans felt a sense of loss, as if a piece of national character had quietly disappeared from their pockets, and decades later historians, collectors, and artists would look back at the 1913 Buffalo nickel as the moment American coinage truly found its own voice, bold, unapologetic, and deeply connected to the land and people it represented. And today, when someone holds a 1913 Buffalo nickel, they are not just holding 5 cents. They are holding a story of survival loss, pride, artistry, and memory, a small, heavy reminder of a nation still defining itself in metal. As decades passed, the 1913 Buffalo nickel slowly transformed from ordinary pocket change into a historical artifact as fewer high-quality examples survived daily use, because the coin's bold relief caused the highest points, such as the Native American cheekbone hair braid and the buffalo's horn, shoulder, and hip, to wear down quickly, and this rapid wear meant that truly well-preserved 1913 Buffalo nickels became rare much earlier than other coins of the same era, and this scarcity helped spark early interest among numismatists, who began carefully setting aside sharper examples even while the coin was still circulating, and coin collectors of the 1920s and 1930s already recognized that the first year of issue held special importance, and within that year, the distinction between Type 1 and Type 2 added another layer of fascination and mystery, and the Type 1, with its raised mound beneath the buffalo, came to represent Fraser's original uncompromised artistic vision, while the Type 2 symbolized the reality of mass production commerce and usability. And this contrast turned the 1913 Buffalo nickel into a case study often discussed in art history design schools and numismatic literature, showing how beauty and function sometimes clash and must find balance. And beyond its physical characteristics, the coin also carried powerful emotional weight, especially for Native American communities, because it was one of the first times indigenous imagery appeared so prominently on circulating U.S. coinage, and while opinions varied, some viewed it as long overdue recognition, while others felt it was a bittersweet tribute, given the ongoing struggles faced by Native peoples during that era. Yet regardless of interpretation, the coin forced Americans to acknowledge the presence, history, and resilience of Native cultures every time it exchanged hands. And as the years went on, stories began to form around specific 1913 Buffalo nickels discovered in unexpected places such as old barns, abandoned houses, family estates, and forgotten piggy banks. And these discoveries fueled the imagination of collectors and treasure hunters alike. And many people recall childhood memories of grandparents showing them worn Buffalo nickels and explaining that they came from a time when the country felt different, more rugged, more uncertain, yet full of hope, and these personal stories helped elevate the coin beyond metal into memory and tradition. And as the Buffalo nickel series gained popularity, collectors started assembling complete date and mint sets, and the 1913 coins always stood as the starting chapter of that journey, representing the birth of the series and the beginning of an era, and auction houses eventually began featuring high-grade 1913 Buffalo nickels as centerpiece lots, drawing attention from investors, historians, and museums, and prices steadily rose, especially for coins with strong strikes, minimal wear, and original surfaces, And even today, the market reflects how deeply collectors value authenticity and preservation, because each surviving coin is a fragile link to a vanished world. And museums often display the 1913 Buffalo nickel alongside photographs of frontier life Native American leaders and roaming bison herds to help visitors understand the broader story the coin represents. And in this way, the nickel serves as both an educational tool and an emotional bridge connecting modern audiences to the early 20th century and the America that existed before highways, suburbs, and digital life. And every time a collector studies the coin under magnification, examining die lines, strike strength, and surface texture, they are engaging in a quiet conversation with history, listening to what the metal has preserved and what time has erased. And through this ongoing fascination, the 1913 Buffalo nickel continues to live far beyond its original purpose, reminding us that even the smallest objects can carry the weight of a nation's story. The story of the 1915 Buffalo nickel begins in the early 20th century, when America was searching for its own artistic identity and wanted coinage that reflected the nation's spirit rather than copying European designs. By 1913, the United States Mint decided to replace the Liberty Head nickel, which had been in circulation since 1883, and officials wanted something bold, something deeply American, something that spoke of the frontier strength and rugged independence that shaped the country. Sculptor James Earl Fraser was chosen for the task, a man who grew up in the American Midwest, surrounded by Native American culture and the open plains where buffalo once roamed freely. Fraser did not imagine his design in theory. He lived it, he had seen it and remembered it, and that authenticity became the soul of the Buffalo nickel. The obverse of the coin featured a powerful Native American profile, not a single individual but a composite portrait created from several real Native American chiefs, including Iron-Tail Two Moons and Big Tree, all men Fraser personally knew. This was unprecedented in U.S. coinage because it portrayed Native Americans with dignity, realism, and strength rather than symbolism. The reverse showed an American bison, commonly called a buffalo, standing firm and heavy on a mound of earth representing the untamed West and the raw power of nature. This image was inspired by Black Diamond, a famous buffalo living at the Bronx Zoo at the time. When the Buffalo nickel entered circulation in 1913, it immediately stood out, and by 1915 it had become one of the most recognizable coins in America. The year 1915 itself is important because it sits between early design challenges and later modifications, making it part of the classic era of the Buffalo nickel. In the first years after release, the coin faced serious problems. The high relief design caused rapid wear, especially on the date and denomination. Many nickels lost their dates after only a few years in circulation, and the mint struggled to balance artistry with practicality. By 1915, adjustments were already underway, but the basic iconic design remained unchanged, making 1915 examples a bridge between original artistic vision and later technical refinements. In 1915, the United States was on the edge of massive global change. World War I was raging in Europe, although America had not yet entered the conflict. Domestically, the country was industrializing. Rapidly, automobiles were becoming common, cities were expanding, and traditional frontier life was fading into memory. The Buffalo nickel served as a reminder of what America believed itself to be strong, free, and rooted in the land. People used these coins daily without realizing they were carrying a piece of living history in their pockets. The Philadelphia Mint produced the majority of 1915 Buffalo nickels, while the Denver and San Francisco Mints also contributed smaller quantities. Each mint left its own subtle fingerprint on the coins through strike-quality metal flow and die wear. Collectors today study these differences carefully because they tell stories about mint conditions, workforce pressure, and technological limits of the era. Coins struck in Denver often show softer details, while San Francisco issues sometimes display sharper strikes, depending on die condition and production speed. One of the most fascinating aspects of the 1915 Buffalo nickel is how wear patterns affect its value and story. Because the date was placed on a raised area, it wore down quickly, making fully dated examples harder to find today. Coins with strong dates, clear hair braids on the Native American, and visible horn detail on the buffalo are highly prized. Over decades, many 1915 nickels were lost, melted, or worn smooth during the Great Depression, when every coin mattered and nothing was saved for sentiment. As the years passed, the Buffalo nickel became more than currency. It became a symbol. Children in the 1920s and 1930s grew up seeing it as part of everyday life. Shopkeepers counted them, soldiers carried them, factory workers spent them, and farmers saved them in jars. By the time the design was retired in 1938, replaced by the Jefferson nickel, an entire generation associated the Buffalo design with America itself. The 1915 issue stood quietly among these years, witnessing social change, economic hardship, and national growth. Today, the 1915 Buffalo nickel holds a special place among collectors, not necessarily for extreme rarity, but for historical balance. It represents the heart of the series, a mature design before heavy alterations and before mass wear erased its details. High-grade examples are increasingly scarce, especially those with full horn detail and strong facial features. Certified specimens graded MS or better can command significant premiums depending on eye appeal strike and surface preservation. Beyond value, the 1915 Buffalo nickel remains powerful because it connects modern viewers to a vanished America. The buffalo, once nearly extinct, and the Native American cultures pushed aside, are preserved together on a small piece of metal that traveled hand to hand across decades. Every scratch and worn edge tells a story of commerce, survival, and movement. When you hold a 1915 Buffalo nickel, you are holding a witness to history, a coin that passed through the hands of people who lived before modern highways, before television, before digital money. This coin reminds us that money is more than numbers and metal, it is memory. The Buffalo nickel does not shout, it endures. Its imagery speaks softly but powerfully of strength, dignity, and loss. The year 1915 stands as a moment frozen between the wild past and the modern future, a time when America still looked backward even as it raced forward. That is why the 1915 Buffalo nickel continues to captivate collectors, historians, and storytellers, and why it deserves to be remembered not just as a coin, but as a cultural artifact of a nation defining itself. As the story of the 1915 Buffalo nickel continues, it is impossible to separate the coin from the emotional climate of America during that era, because coins do not exist in isolation. They move with people through moments of hope, uncertainty, and change. By 1915, America was watching the world burn from a distance. Newspapers carried daily reports of trench warfare, poison gas, and fallen empires, while at home factories expanded, railroads stretched farther, and the idea of the old frontier was becoming a memory rather than a reality. The buffalo that once thundered across the plains in massive herds had been reduced to a symbol, and the Native American way of life had been confined and controlled, yet on this coin both stood proud, unbroken, and timeless. The Buffalo nickel circulated heavily in everyday transactions during 1915, and unlike gold or silver coins, it was not stored away by banks or wealthy individuals. It was the coin of the people, passed across saloon counters, dropped into fare boxes handed to children for candy, and tucked into coat pockets by laborers at the end of long days. Because of this heavy use, many 1915 nickels experienced rapid wear, making surviving well-detailed examples rare today. Each worn coin is evidence of how deeply embedded it was in daily American life. The mint faced ongoing challenges producing the Buffalo nickel, and by 1915 engravers and technicians were constantly adjusting dies to keep details visible while maintaining production speed. The raised date and high-relief portrait caused metal flow problems, and dies wore out quickly, which resulted in weaker strikes on many coins. This created subtle differences between early and late strikes of the same year, giving modern collectors clues about the order in which coins were made. These imperfections are not flaws but fingerprints of history left by human hands and mechanical limitations. During this period, America was also experiencing cultural shifts. Immigration was reshaping cities, women were pushing for voting rights, and the old rural economy was slowly giving way to industrial labor. The Buffalo nickel quietly absorbed all of this change without commentary, yet its imagery seemed to argue for remembrance. It reminded citizens of roots, strength, and identity at a time when progress threatened to erase memory. In this way, the 1915 Buffalo nickel was not just currency, it was silent resistance against forgetting. As years turned into decades, many 1915 nickels disappeared during the economic turmoil of the 1920s and 1930s. The Great Depression forced families to spend every coin they had, and very few people thought to save nickels for the future. Coin collecting as a widespread hobby did not fully mature until later, meaning that countless Buffalo nickels were worn, flat or lost, forever. This makes surviving examples especially meaningful because they survived not through intention, but through chance. Collectors today study the 1915 Buffalo nickel. For more than its surface features, they study its story. The texture of the fields, the softness of the hair braid, the curvature of the buffalo's horn, all become chapters in a larger narrative. Coins from old family collections often show honest wear and dark patina, revealing decades of handling. Others, preserved in drawers or forgotten purses, emerge nearly untouched, offering a glimpse of how the coin looked when it was new, shining, and bold. The legacy of the Buffalo nickel has influenced modern American coinage more than most designs. Its artistic courage paved the way for later coins that celebrated national heritage rather than abstract symbolism. Even today, the Buffalo design is revived in gold bullion coins, proving that Fraser's vision was timeless. The 1915 issue sits firmly within that legacy, representing continuity rather than transition, a stable year where the design spoke clearly and confidently. When historians and collectors reflect on the Buffalo nickel, they often speak of nostalgia, but it is more than that. The coin captures a moment when America paused between who it had been and who it was becoming. The 1915 Buffalo nickel traveled through a nation on the brink of global involvement, modern warfare, and technological acceleration, yet it carried images from an older world, one rooted in land, tradition, and endurance. Holding a 1915 Buffalo nickel today creates a bridge across time. It connects the present to hands long gone, voices long silent, and lives long finished. It reminds us that history is not only written in books, but pressed into metal, carried unknowingly by millions. This is why the Buffalo nickel continues to inspire long conversations, documentaries, and stories, because it is not just something you look at, it is something you feel. As time moved forward, the 1915 Buffalo nickel continued its quiet journey through American hands, carrying with it the weight of an era that most people never stopped to consider. These coins crossed paths with immigrants stepping onto new streets, factory workers adapting to machines, and farmers watching the land change beneath them. A single nickel might pass through dozens of lives in a single year, each exchange adding invisible history to its surface. By the time decades had passed, the coin was no longer just metal, it had become experience pressed into form. The Buffalo nickel also traveled through moments of national pride and deep uncertainty. During the years following 1915, America would eventually enter World War I, and many young men carried coins like these overseas tucked into pockets or bags as small reminders of home. Some nickels were lost in foreign soil, others returned scarred and worn just like the soldiers themselves. Though no records track individual coins, the possibility adds emotional weight to every surviving piece from that era. As automobiles became more common and cities expanded, the Buffalo nickel witnessed the transformation of everyday life. It was dropped into parking meters used in early vending machines and exchanged for newspapers that announced victories, tragedies, and change. Children born in 1915 would grow up with this coin as a constant presence, unaware that one day it would become a collectible artifact studied under magnification and sealed in protective cases. By the 1930s, when the Great Depression swept across the nation, the Buffalo nickel became even more essential. 5 cents could buy food transportation or a moment of relief, and families guarded every coin carefully. Many 1915 nickels were worn nearly smooth during this period, losing their dates and details, but gaining stories of survival. Those featureless nickels tell a powerful truth about hardship and resilience because they were used until nothing was left to give. When the Buffalo nickel was officially retired in 1938, many people barely noticed. A new design entered circulation, and life moved on. Yet the Buffalo image lingered in memory, and nostalgia slowly began to form. Older Americans remembered the coin from their youth, while younger generations encountered it as something old and mysterious. The 1915 Buffalo nickel became a representative of the past, not because it was rare, but because it had endured. Coin collecting gained popularity in the mid-20th century, and attention turned back to the Buffalo nickel series. Collectors realized that early and mid-date coins like 1915 held special importance because they balanced availability with historical depth. Finding one with strong details became a challenge, and that challenge sparked passion, curiosity, and preservation. Each discovery felt like rescuing a fragment of history from obscurity. The artistry of the Buffalo nickel also gained renewed appreciation. James Earl Fraser's vision was finally recognized as revolutionary and courageous. At a time when coins were expected to be neat, orderly, and classical, he gave America something raw and emotional. The 1915 issue fully embodies that vision because it was struck when the design was still bold, yet seasoned by circulation and time. Museums, exhibitions, and educational programs now use the Buffalo nickel to explain early 20th century America. The coin becomes a teaching tool connecting economics, art, culture, and history. Students learn that money reflects values and that even small objects can tell large stories. The 1915 Buffalo nickel serves this role beautifully because it sits at the crossroads of tradition and transformation. In modern times, collectors search old estates jars and forgotten boxes, hoping to find a Buffalo nickel hiding among ordinary change. When a 1915 example appears, it sparks excitement not just for potential value, but for connection. The coin represents authenticity in a digital age, a physical link to a world without screens, instant communication, or electronic money. Every time the Buffalo nickel design is revived or referenced, it reinforces the lasting power of the original. The 1915 Buffalo nickel stands as proof that true artistry does not fade, it deepens. Its surfaces may wear, its edges may soften, but its meaning only grows stronger. It reminds us that history lives in everyday objects and that even the smallest coin can carry the weight of a nation's journey. The Buffalo nickel of 1919 belongs to one of the most iconic eras of American coinage, and its story is deeply tied to art, culture, politics, and everyday life in the United States during the early 20th century. The coin, officially known as the Indian head nickel, was introduced in 1913 as part of a movement to beautify American coinage, inspired by President Theodore Roosevelt, who believed U.S. coins should reflect the nation's strength, heritage, and artistic ambition. By 1919, the design was already famous and widely recognized across the country, appearing in pockets, cash registers, and bank drawers during a time when America was adjusting to the aftermath of the First World War and stepping into a new age of industrial growth and social change. The designer of the Buffalo nickel was sculptor James Earl Fraser, who grew up in the American Midwest and had personal memories of Native American culture and the disappearing frontier. Fraser wanted the coin to represent A true American identity rather than copying classical European styles, the obverse of the coin features a powerful right-facing portrait of a Native American that is not a single individual but a composite of several Native leaders Fraser admired, including Irontail Two Moons and Big Tree. This portrait symbolized dignity, strength, and the deep roots of the land long before modern America was formed. The reverse of the coin shows an American bison, often called a buffalo, standing on a raised mound in the early issues, which represented the wild spirit of the West and the massive herds that once roamed the plains. By 1919, the buffalo nickel had already gone through design adjustments because the original raised mound on the reverse caused the denomination to wear off too quickly. In 1913, the mint modified the reverse to place the buffalo on a flatter plane so that the words 5 cents would last longer in circulation. The 1919 buffalo nickel was struck only in this later type. Style, which collectors today recognize by the flat ground beneath the buffalo, this change makes the 1919 issue part of the more durable and practical phase of the series. The year 1919 itself was significant in American history, and that context adds depth to the coin's story. The nation was recovering from the First World War, which had officially ended in late 1918. Soldiers were returning home. Industries were shifting from wartime production back to civilian needs, and the economy was entering a brief but intense period of adjustment. Inflation, labor strikes, and social tension were common, and coins like the buffalo nickel were used daily by millions of Americans buying food, paying fares, and handling small transactions in a rapidly modernizing society. The 1919 buffalo nickel was produced at 3 different mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia mint struck coins without a mint mark, while Denver used the D mint mark and San Francisco used this mint mark located beneath the words 5 cents on the reverse. Each mint produced different quantities, and this affects rarity and collector interest today. The Philadelphia issue had the highest production and is generally the most common, while the Denver and San Francisco issues had lower mintages and are more challenging to find in high grades. Quality control during this period was inconsistent, and many 1919 buffalo nickels were weakly struck, especially on the buffalo's horn and the Native American's hair braid. This makes fully detailed examples particularly desirable to collectors. Coins with a strong horn visible on the buffalo are often referred to as having a full horn, and these command higher premiums in the collector market. The metal composition of the coin remained standard for the series, consisting of 75% copper and 25% nickel, which gave the coin its durability, but also contributed to die wear and softer details. In everyday life, the 1919 buffalo nickel was a workhorse coin. It circulated heavily during the 1920s and 30s, passing through the Great Depression, when every cent mattered. Many examples were worn smooth during decades of use, which is why high-grade specimens are scarce today. Children might have used them for candy streetcar rides or movie tickets, while adults used them for groceries, newspapers, and small household needs. The coin became a silent witness to countless personal stories and historical moments. Culturally, the buffalo nickel represented a romanticized vision of the American past. At a time when that past was rapidly disappearing, Native American tribes were facing harsh federal policies and confinement to reservations, while the buffalo, which once numbered in the millions, had been nearly driven to extinction by the late 19th century. Fraser's design served as both a tribute and a reminder of what had been lost, making the coin emotionally powerful as well as visually striking. Today, the 1919 buffalo nickel is studied, collected, and admired not only for its monetary value, but for its place in American art and history. Collectors examine strike-quality surface preservation and originality, while historians view the coin as a reflection of national identity during a transformative era. Whether found heavily worn or preserved in mint state, the 1919 buffalo nickel carries with it the weight of the past, linking modern collectors to a time of recovery, resilience, and change in the United States. Beyond its basic design and wartime context, the 1919 Buffalo nickel sits at an interesting crossroads of American coin production technology and national identity. By this time, the United States Mint was struggling to balance artistic ambition with mass production demands. The Buffalo nickel was admired by the public, but disliked by many mint officials because its high-relief details caused dies to wear out quickly and strikes to appear weak. In 1919, mint workers often had to use dies longer than ideal, which resulted in soft details, especially on the Native American's cheekbone date and the buffalo's horn and tail. This is why sharply struck 1919 coins are far scarcer than later dates from the mid-1930s. Die varieties from 1919 also add another layer of fascination for collectors and historians, while no famous overdates exist for this year like the legendary 1918 over 7 Buffalo nickel. There are subtle repunched mint marks and minor die cracks that show the intense pressure under which the mint operated. These small imperfections tell a human story of engravers, technicians, and press operators working long hours to keep up with the nation's need for coinage during a turbulent economic recovery. In 1919, America was experiencing the Red Summer, a period of widespread racial tension and violence alongside labor unrest and massive strikes in steel, coal, and transportation industries. Coins like the Buffalo nickel circulated during these moments of uncertainty, passing through hands of factory workers, farmers, immigrants, and returning veterans. The Native American portrait on the coin stood in quiet contrast to the real struggles faced by indigenous peoples, at the time who were still denied full citizenship until 1924. This contrast makes the coin historically complex, because it honors Native imagery while existing, in an era that often ignored Native rights. The buffalo itself had become a symbol of conservation by 1919. Thanks to early preservation efforts, the American bison had narrowly escaped extinction. Zoos, national parks, and private herds were helping rebuild populations. The presence of the buffalo on everyday money reminded Americans of both destruction and responsibility, and reflected a growing awareness of environmental conservation that would continue into the 20th century. As the 1920s progressed, the 1919 Buffalo nickel continued to circulate alongside newer dates, and its surfaces gradually softened from use. Many were later melted or lost during economic hardship, especially during the Great Depression when people hoarded silver and neglected base metal coins. Others were pulled from circulation by collectors once the Buffalo nickel series ended in 1938 and was replaced by the Jefferson nickel. By that point, the Buffalo nickel had become nostalgic almost, immediately representing an older, more rugged vision of America. In the modern collecting world, the 1919 Buffalo nickel is appreciated not just as a single coin, but as part of a broader narrative of American coin artistry. Numismatists often compare it to earlier Liberty designs and later Jefferson nickels, noting how bold and sculptural Fraser's work was. Museums and textbooks frequently highlight the Buffalo nickel as one of the greatest achievements in United States coin design, and the 1919 issue represents a mature phase of that design, still powerful, yet already bearing the marks of heavy circulation. For a YouTube audience, the story of the 1919 Buffalo nickel can be stretched into hours by exploring its artistic origins, its place in post-war America, its role in daily life, and its journey from pocket change to collectible artifact. Every worn date and faded detail becomes part of a larger story connecting the coin to a nation redefining itself after war, industrialization, and cultural change. As we go even deeper into the story, the 1919 Buffalo nickel also reflects how ordinary Americans interacted with money on a daily emotional level during the early 20th century. Cash was physical and personal, and coins were handled constantly. Unlike today's digital transactions, a nickel in 1919 had real purchasing power and could represent a small moment of relief or comfort, especially in working-class families. The Buffalo nickel often stayed in circulation, for decades, meaning a single 1919 coin could pass through thousands of hands across different states, towns, and generations, silently absorbing history. At the minting presses in 1919, technology was still largely mechanical with limited automation. Compared to modern standards, blank planchets were fed into heavy presses that struck each coin with immense force. The hardness of the copper-nickel alloy combined with Fraser's bold sculptural design caused dies to crack and erode quickly. This resulted in many coins having uneven details, which today helps historians understand minting pressures and production shortcuts taken during periods of high demand. The visible wear on original mint dies tells a behind-the-scenes story of industrial strain during post-war America. The Native American portrait on the 1919 Buffalo nickel also gained symbolic meaning over time. While originally intended as a tribute, it became part of a broader conversation about representation and memory. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Native cultures were often portrayed as vanishing, and the coin unintentionally reinforced this idea. Yet modern historians and Native scholars view the design as a complicated artifact that both honors strength and reminds us of displacement, loss, and survival. This layered interpretation gives the 1919 Buffalo nickel relevance far beyond its face value. During the Prohibition era, which began in 1920, just 1 year after this coin was minted, the 1919 Buffalo nickel circulated in speakeasies, diners, corner stores, and rural trading posts. It could have paid for a newspaper reporting on bootlegging raids or been slid across a counter for a cup of coffee during long factory shifts. Coins from this era are often discovered today with deep-wear smooth fields and barely visible dates showing just how intensely they were used through dramatic chapters of American social history. As the Great Depression arrived in 1929, Buffalo nickels, including those dated 1919, became even more important. Small change was crucial when money was scarce, and many people relied on nickels for survival-level purchases. Some families saved jars of change as emergency funds, and others used them for bartering. This heavy circulation explains why so many 1919 Buffalo nickels are found in worn condition and why uncirculated examples feel almost like time capsules frozen at the moment of minting. When the Buffalo nickel series ended in 1938, many Americans felt a sense of loss. Even though the Jefferson nickel was more practical and easier to strike, Fraser's design had become emotionally tied to an older America of open-land frontier stories and national mythology. The 1919 issue sat near the center of the series' timeline, making it a representative example of the coin at its most widely used stage, rather than at its beginning or end. In the decades that followed, collectors began pulling Buffalo nickels from circulation. Especially during the coin-collecting boom of the 1950s and 1960s, people searched pocket change albums and old drawers hoping to find readable dates and stronger strikes. The 1919 Buffalo nickel became a familiar target for beginners and experts alike because it was attainable yet still historically rich. This accessibility helped cement its place in American numismatic culture. Today, when a collector holds a 1919 Buffalo nickel, they are not just holding metal but a compressed piece of American experience, shaped by war recovery, industrial labor, cultural tension, conservation, awareness, and artistic ambition. The coin bridges the past and present, making it perfect for long-form storytelling on YouTube, where each detail can unfold, slowly connecting viewers to the rhythm of another era and turning a simple 5-cent piece into a journey through history. The Buffalo nickel of 1920 stands as one of the most fascinating chapters in American coin history because it was born at a moment when the United States was standing between two worlds, the fading frontier spirit of the 19th century and the fast-moving industrial power of the 20th century. By 1920, America had survived. World War I endured social change and stepped into a new era of automobiles, factories, and cities. Yet the soul of the nation still looked back toward the open plains. Native American heritage, and the powerful image of the American bison. The buffalo nickel carried that memory in metal. The buffalo nickel, officially known as the Indian head nickel, was first introduced in 1913, replacing the Liberty head design that had been used for decades. The new design was bold, emotional, and unlike anything Americans had seen on circulating coinage before. It was created by sculptor James Earl Fraser, who had grown up in the American West, surrounded by Native American culture and frontier life. Fraser believed American coins should reflect American identity rather than classical European imagery, and the buffalo nickel became his masterpiece. By the time the 1920 buffalo nickel was struck, the design was already 7 years old, but it had become deeply symbolic. The obverse side features a powerful portrait of a Native American chief, not a single individual, but a composite created from several real Native leaders. Fraser studied and admired these men, represented strength, dignity, and survival at a time when Native American communities were facing immense hardship, cultural suppression, and loss of land. The face on the 1920 buffalo nickel is not romanticized, but realistic, showing age, character, and resilience. The reverse side of the coin shows a massive American bison standing firmly on the ground. The animal was modeled after Black Diamond, a famous bison that lived at the Central Park Zoo. The bison was chosen because it symbolized the wild heart of America, a creature that once roamed the plains in the millions but had nearly been hunted to extinction by the early 20th century. In 1920, the buffalo was already a symbol of loss and preservation, reminding Americans of what could disappear if not protected. The year 1920 itself was a turning point in American history. The nation was recovering from World War I, soldiers were returning home, industries were booming, and society was changing rapidly. Women were on the verge of gaining the right to vote, prohibition was beginning, and the Jazz Age was about to explode. Against this backdrop, the buffalo nickel circulated quietly in pockets and purses, connecting everyday Americans to a deeper historical identity. The 1920 buffalo nickel was struck at 3 different mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Each mint produced coins with subtle differences that collectors study closely today. The Philadelphia mint did not include a mint mark, while Denver coins carried a small D and San Francisco coins carried an S. These small letters would later become crucial in determining rarity and value, especially as many buffalo nickels wore down quickly due to their high relief design. One of the major challenges with the buffalo nickel design was durability. The date and denomination were placed in raised areas that wore away easily. By 1920, millions of earlier, buffalo nickels had already lost their dates entirely, making them dateless coins. This problem affected the 1920 issue as well, although later in 1913, the design had been slightly modified to better protect the date. Even so, finding a 1920 buffalo nickel with a clear readable date today is far more difficult than many people realize. During 1920, the average American used the buffalo nickel daily. It bought newspapers, streetcar rides, candy, and small household items. It passed through countless hands during a time when cash was king and every coin mattered. Few people imagined that these nickels would one day be studied, collected, and valued as historic artifacts. They were tools of survival, not treasures. Economically, the year 1920 marked a period of adjustment after wartime production. Factories shifted from military supplies to consumer goods. Inflation rose and fell. Wages fluctuated, and many families relied on small change like nickels to stretch their budgets. The buffalo nickel was part of this economic reality, symbolizing stability in a rapidly changing nation. Culturally, the Native American image on the coin carried complex meaning. While it honored indigenous strength, it also existed during an era when Native Americans were denied full citizenship and faced forced assimilation. It was not until 1924 that Native Americans were granted U.S. citizenship. The 1920 buffalo nickel therefore exists in a space of both tribute and contradiction, making it historically powerful and emotionally layered. From a numismatic perspective, the 1920 Buffalo nickel is admired for its artistry and studied for its variations. Strike quality often varied, with many coins showing weak details, especially on the buffalo's horn and the Native American's hair. Collectors today look carefully at these areas to judge condition. Coins with strong strikes and minimal wear are significantly more valuable than average circulated examples. Over time, the Buffalo nickel became more than currency. It became a symbol of American identity during the Great Depression. That followed a decade later. Many people saved coins, unknowingly preserving history. By the time the Buffalo nickel series ended in 1938, replaced by the Jefferson nickel, Americans already felt nostalgic for the design. The 1920 Buffalo nickel survived through roaring 20s hardship, wartime, and modernization. It passed through the hands of factory workers, farmers, soldiers, shopkeepers, and children. Each coin carries invisible stories of the lives it touched. Every scratch and worn edge reflects a moment in American history. Today, when collectors hold a 1920 Buffalo nickel, they are not just holding 5 cents. They are holding a snapshot of America at a crossroads, a nation remembering its past while racing toward its future. The coin connects Native American heritage, frontier, mythology, conservation awareness, and early 20th century life in a way few coins ever have. The Buffalo nickel remains one of the most beloved U.S. coin designs ever created, and the 1920 issue stands proudly within that legacy. It represents endurance, art, and national identity struck into metal during one of the most transformative periods in American history. As the 1920 Buffalo nickel continued to circulate across America, it silently witnessed the transformation of everyday life. The early 1920s brought electricity into more homes, automobiles onto dusty roads, and motion pictures into crowded theaters. Yet, while technology raced forward, the imagery on the Buffalo nickel remained rooted in the land and its original people, creating a powerful contrast between modern progress and historical memory. In rural America, the 1920 Buffalo nickel often changed hands in farming communities where mechanization was slowly replacing traditional labor. Tractors began appearing in fields once worked by horses, and families who had relied on barter now depended more on cash transactions. The nickel represented reliability, a small but essential unit of exchange in an economy still tied closely to agriculture. In cities, the same coin passed through factories, diners, streetcars, and corner shops. Industrial workers earning daily wages relied heavily on small denomination coins. The Buffalo nickel clinked in lunch pails and coat pockets, paying for coffee, bread, newspapers, and entertainment. It became part of the rhythm of daily life, rarely noticed, yet always present. The artistry of the 1920 Buffalo nickel continued to influence how Americans viewed their own culture. Unlike earlier coins that borrowed heavily from European styles, this design was unapologetically American. The Native American portrait did not resemble a mythological figure, but a real human face with sharp cheekbones, deep eyes, and a solemn expression. That realism gave the coin emotional weight and set a new standard for American coin design. James Earl Fraser intended the buffalo on the reverse to appear grounded and powerful rather than decorative. The animal stands firmly on the earth, representing endurance and survival. This message resonated strongly in 1920 as Americans reflected on the cost of war and the fragility of progress. The buffalo was no longer abundant, but efforts to protect and preserve it had begun, making the image one of hope as well as warning. Minting technology in 1920 still struggled to fully capture Fraser's high-relief design. As a result, many 1920 Buffalo nickels show uneven, striking especially around the date Liberty and the buffalo's details. This inconsistency has fascinated collectors for generations because no two coins seem exactly alike. Each one tells a slightly different story of pressure, metal flow, and human craftsmanship. Over time, certain mint issues from 1920 gained particular attention. Coins struck at the San Francisco Mint were often weaker, due to worn dies and lower striking pressure. Denver coins sometimes show sharper details, but were produced. In smaller quantities, Philadelphia coins were more plentiful, but still suffered from wear issues. These differences transformed the 1920 Buffalo nickel into a puzzle that collectors continue to study carefully. As the 1920s progressed, the Buffalo nickel remained in circulation alongside major social changes. Jazz music challenged traditional norms, prohibition reshaped nightlife, and cultural expression exploded. Yet even as America danced into modernity, the coin's imagery reminded people of older values, strength, resilience, and respect for the land. For Native Americans, the coin carried mixed meaning. While it placed their image at the center of national currency, it did not reflect their lived reality. Many indigenous communities continued to face discrimination, poverty, and cultural suppression during this period. The 1920 Buffalo nickel therefore stands as both recognition and reminder of unresolved injustice, making it historically complex and deeply symbolic. During economic downturns later in the decade, families often saved coins, unknowingly preserving Buffalo nickels in drawers, jars, and boxes. These small acts of saving allowed many 1920 coins to survive into the present day. Though heavily worn, they remain authentic witnesses to history. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, Buffalo nickels, including those from 1920, were still circulating. Their worn surfaces reflected years of hardship use and survival. For many Americans, these coins were lifelines used for basic necessities at a time when every cent mattered. By the time the Buffalo nickel was officially replaced in 1938, the design had already earned legendary status. The Jefferson nickel introduced that year was cleaner and more practical, but many Americans missed the bold artistry of the Buffalo and Native American portrait. The end of the series marked the close of an era. Today, the 1920 Buffalo nickel is studied not just for its monetary value, but for what it represents. It is a bridge between frontier America and industrial power, between native heritage and modern identity, between art and everyday life. Holding one is like holding time itself. Collectors examine wear patterns, strike quality, and surface texture to understand how each coin lived its life. Some 1920 Buffalo nickels may have crossed state lines, others passed through generations of families. Each journey is silent, yet meaningful. The legacy of the 1920 Buffalo nickel continues to influence modern coinage. Its spirit lives on in commemorative designs and collector enthusiasm, proving that a small piece of metal can carry enormous cultural weight. The Buffalo nickel of 1925 belongs to one of the most powerful and symbolic eras in American coin history, an era where the United States was still defining its national identity through art industry and frontier memory. This coin, officially known as the Indian head, nickel was born from a desire to break away from dull mechanical coin designs and replace them with something bold, emotional, and deeply American. The year 1925 sits right in the heart of the Buffalo nickel series, which began in 1913 and ended in 1938. Making the 1925 issue a true mid-era survivor of a dramatic time in U.S. history. The idea behind the Buffalo nickel came from President Theodore Roosevelt, who believed American coinage should reflect strength, beauty, and heritage. He pushed artists to create coins that looked like works of art rather than factory products. Sculptor James Earl Fraser answered this call by designing a coin that honored two disappearing symbols of America, the Native American and the American. Bison Fraser had grown up in the American West and personally witnessed the fading frontier culture, which deeply influenced his design philosophy. On the front of the coin, Fraser created a composite portrait of a Native American chief, combining the facial features of several real individuals, including Iron-Tailed Two Moons and Big Tree. This was not meant to represent one man, but an entire people and their legacy. The strong profile, rough texture, and determined expression gave the coin an emotional depth never seen before on U.S. currency. By 1925, this image had already become iconic, but it was also controversial as the design wore down easily in circulation. The reverse of the coin featured a massive American buffalo standing on a mound. The model for this animal was Black Diamond, a famous bison living at the Bronx Zoo. The buffalo symbolized raw strength, survival, and the untamed spirit of the nation. By 1925, the buffalo population had narrowly escaped extinction, making this image even more meaningful to the public, who saw the coin as a reminder of what America had nearly lost. The year 1925 itself was part of the Roaring Twenties, a time of economic growth. Jazz culture, industrial expansion, and shifting social values, automobiles, radios, and motion pictures were transforming daily life. Yet the Buffalo nickel remained a link to a fading past. While cities grew and factories expanded, this small coin carried images of wilderness, heritage, and indigenous history in the pockets of millions. In 1925, Buffalo nickels were struck at two mints, Philadelphia and Denver. The Philadelphia mint produced a very large quantity, while the Denver mint produced fewer coins, making the 1925 D Buffalo nickel more difficult to find today. Especially in high grades, the San Francisco Mint did not produce Buffalo nickels that year, adding another layer of distinction to the 1925 issue. One of the biggest challenges with Buffalo nickels, especially those from 1925, is where the date and the word liberty were struck in high relief and tended to fade quickly during circulation. Many 1925 nickels lost their dates entirely after years of use, creating what collectors call dateless Buffalo nickels. Because of this, fully dated 1925 coins are far more desirable today, especially with sharp details visible in the hair braid horn and lettering. The metal composition of the 1925 Buffalo nickel consisted of 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving it durability, but also contributing to the heavy wear seen on the design during the era. These coins passed through countless hands during a time when cash was king, used in streetcars, general stores, diners, and newsstands. As the decade progressed, the Buffalo nickel continued circulating through monumental events, including the stock market boom and later the crash of 1929. Many 1925 nickels were still in use during the Great Depression, carrying stories of hardship, resilience, and survival. The coin became a silent witness to breadlines, dust storms, and economic struggle. Collectors today view the 1925 Buffalo nickel as an accessible yet historically rich piece. While it is not the rarest year, its condition rarity makes high-grade examples, especially uncirculated coins, highly valuable. Denver Mint examples with strong strikes are especially sought after and can command significant prices depending on condition. The legacy of the 1925 Buffalo nickel is not just about value or rarity, but about symbolism. It represents a nation caught between progress and remembrance, modern industry and ancient roots. It captures a moment when America chose to honor its past even as it raced toward the future. When the Buffalo nickel series ended in 1938, it was replaced by the Jefferson nickel, marking a return to more traditional coin design. Yet the Buffalo nickel never faded from public affection. It remains one of the most beloved U.S. coins ever made, and the 1925 issue stands firmly in the center of that legacy, bridging early experimental years and later refinements. Today, holding a 1925 Buffalo nickel is like holding a fragment of American soul, a piece of metal that carries art history, culture, loss, strength, and survival, all in one small circle. And that is why this coin continues to fascinate collectors, historians, and storytellers nearly a century later. As the Buffalo nickel of 1925 continued to circulate, it quietly absorbed the fingerprints of a changing nation. Every scratch, nick, and worn edge told a story of movement, trade, and daily survival. During the 20s, America was experiencing a cultural split between modern urban life and traditional rural values. And the buffalo nickel lived at the center of this divide. Farmers carried it into grain markets. Factory workers spent it on lunches. Immigrants used it to build new lives. And children saved it in jars without realizing they were holding a future collectible. By 1925, the design flaws of the buffalo nickel were already well known. Mint officials understood that the high relief date and Liberty inscription wore down quickly, but public affection for the design kept it alive. Despite technical complaints, the coin was difficult to strike properly, and dies wore out fast, which often resulted in weak details, especially on the buffalo horn and tail on many 1925 issues. This inconsistency created subtle variations that collectors study today. The Denver Mint buffalo nickels of 1925 are particularly interesting because the mint often struggled with strike quality. Many examples show soft features, especially on the Native American's braid and cheekbone, as well as the buffalo's shoulder and flank. These characteristics were not intentional, but were the result of production pressure and limited die life. Yet these imperfections now give each coin a unique personality. Another layer of the 1925 buffalo nickel story is its role in everyday commerce during Prohibition. Speakeasies, jazz clubs, and underground bars operated quietly, while official laws banned alcohol. The same coin used to buy a soda legally might later be exchanged secretly for illegal liquor, making the buffalo nickel an unspoken participant in one of the most rebellious chapters of American history. During this era, Native American communities themselves were facing cultural suppression, forced assimilation, and economic hardship. While their image appeared proudly on the coin, many critics later pointed out the irony that indigenous people were honored symbolically while suffering in reality. This contradiction adds emotional complexity to the 1925 buffalo nickel and deepens its historical meaning beyond simple patriotism. As the years passed, the coin survived mechanical counting machines' harsh weather and constant friction. Many were melted or discarded, yet millions endured the Great Depression when money was scarce and coins were reused endlessly. A 1925 buffalo nickel might have bought a loaf of bread one day and passed through 10 hands by nightfall. These coins were not collectibles, then they were lifelines. When World War II arrived, many buffalo nickels were already worn smooth and nearly forgotten, yet they still circulated alongside newer coins. Until being gradually replaced, the Jefferson nickel officially ended the Buffalo series in 1938. But even afterward, older coins like the 1925 issue continued appearing in circulation well into the 40s and early 50s. Collectors began seriously paying attention to buffalo nickels decades later as nostalgia grew, and Americans looked back at earlier eras with renewed appreciation. The 1925 buffalo nickel gained recognition not for rarity alone, but for its placement in the timeline, a coin struck during optimism yet carried through hardship. Today, the 1925 buffalo nickel represents endurance it survived, design criticism, economic collapse, cultural conflict, and industrial change, and still emerged as one of the most loved American coins ever created. It is studied not just for metal content or condition, but for the emotions it evokes. Every worn date, partially visible, Liberty, and flattened buffalo tells a story of time passing hands, working dreams rising and falling, and a nation learning who it was and who it wanted to become. And that is why the 1925 buffalo nickel continues to live far beyond its face value as a silent storyteller of American history.